Afternoon. My name is Dawn Spalding, and we are going to be discussing salvation, which is at the absolute foundation and utter heart of the Gospels. Now, I know when I first approached the church, having not grown up in it much myself, I didn't even really know what the Gospels were. The Gospels are essentially the good news. They're told in 4 different perspectives by 4 different men, but it is essentially the same good news. And this good news is simply this, that Jesus Christ died on the cross to redeem a imperfect people to a perfect God. As we jump through our text, we're going to see 4 essential hopes that are traced throughout the Gospels and throughout salvation itself, which is the hope of salvation, the hope for the sinner, and the hope found only through Christ at the cross. And so, with our first one, we're going to look at the hope of salvation, which we're going to see through Psalm 62:1. Now, when you and I probably think of salvation, we think of someone who either is walking in a wild desert or hiking or somehow wound up abandoned or alienated, in need of saving, in need of hope. And the first verse of Psalm 62 gives us that same illustration as well. It describes God as a rock in which cannot be moved, a fortress, a place of rest. And this is essentially what we see through the gospel as well. When we look at the gospel, we see that Jesus is that place of rest, that unmovable rock, that fortress in which sinners can come to find rest for their weary souls. He is the rock which can't be moved, the fortress, our stronghold during our own sinful struggles. And this is the hope of salvation, that when we carry the massive burdens of life or even our own struggles, we have the hope of Christ, the unmovable rock, the fortress. The second we see is the hope for the sinner. This is an essential one, not only throughout the Old Testament, but the New as well, that there is hope for what feels like irredeemable, the lost, the broken. One of the biggest questions we may often have when it comes to salvation and who is this salvation aimed at? Often feeling like our own struggles, our own sins are probably too much for us to be included in that. That's just for the individual who makes a few mistakes here and there, but there's a line to it. And we see with John 4 specifically that that's not the case at all. The Samaritan woman brings to the table the same questions you and I might. She comes to Jacob's well looking for an earthly water solution to her struggles, and finds something far greater, far deeper, which is an eternal spring of water that is never ending. You and I similarly as well. Many of us may very well be coming to him for an earthly need and find that it is an eternal cure we are given instead. Not an earthly water, but an eternal spring which never ends, and a thirst that is eventually quenched. Our last is the hope found at the cross, which we see through Hebrews 9:28. The last question we may very well be asking ourselves is, what does this have to do with Jesus? My hope for salvation, my hope for answers in my own struggle, and just the general brokenness of the world around us. What does a 2nd century Jew in Israel have to do with this search for the struggle that I have? And the answer we find is in the 28th verse of the 9th chapter of the book of Hebrews. Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. And so when we look at that, we see that Jesus lived on earth and died on the cross for many sinners who will be redeemed to God. And our goal following that, living here on earth, is to glorify him, bring glory to him, and even share this good news with as many people as possible for the hope of the day of his return, in which he will bring salvation to those who call him Lord. Despite the sorrows and hardships of our everyday life, there is a hope for the sinner. There is a salvation that awaits, and an eternal rock, and an eternal spring of water, a fortress which cannot be harmed. And that resting spot is found in Christ alone. This is the good news. This is the good news of salvation. Let us be glad and thankful for it.